So my name's Laura Sansone, and I'm a part-time professor at Parsons School of Design, and I run a company called York Textile Lab, which is a design and consulting company. And I am a Fibershed affiliate. I'm the New York Fibershed affiliate. And before I want to talk to you a little bit about our carbon farm network, the work that we're doing here. But before I do that, I just want to I want to say some thank yous. I think those are in order. The first person I want to thank is Evan, my partner, who usually isn't here because he runs a community acupuncture clinic, but he was off today. And Evan, just all those pictures on Instagram of me like schlepping fiber around for our network, Evan is on the other side of the camera, so you guys know. He deals with all aspects of Fibershed. He helps us build things and grow things. So thanks, Ev. Thanks for shuttling people. I want to thank Gibson Durnford, who started, we wouldn't have carbon farm plans here in New York if it wasn't for Gibson. I guess he's here. I don't know. He's never here when he's always inside when I acknowledge him. But he really started as our ag planner. We've received the USDA award, we're going to be hiring 2 ag planners, and Gibson will remain with us in an advisory capacity, which is really great, but he's really done so much for us, so thank you. Haley Moore, I want to thank, who's my design assistant. I don't know where she is. Oh, there she is. Haley's amazing, and she helps with everything. Thank you so much, Haley. I can't even thank you enough for all you do. And Teagan West, who is recording the event, and both Teagan and Haley are from Parsons. They're former students, and I'm so grateful that they share their talents with me. So thank you so much for being here, both of you. And Stacie, of course, thank you, Stacie Chavez, for sponsoring this event year after year. It's really terrific that we do this. It's fun. Thank you for that. So one of our big missions at New York Textile Lab is to really look at ways to reshape our textile systems, both structurally and in a systemic way. One of the big missions is to move designers to the beginning of the value chain. As designers, we're problem solvers, right? And it doesn't make sense for us to enter the value chain in the middle, which is typically, like with the value chain, we're usually buying materials from a supplier. We really need to be at the beginning of that value chain so we can be building deep value into the products we're creating. And what I mean by deep value is at every stage of that value chain, like, if you're looking at a sweater, for example, you shear the sheep and you have the raw fiber, and then it's worth a certain amount of money. You wash it, the value goes up. You process it, the value goes up. You spin it, etc. But we're only really looking at the monetary value there. We're not looking at what I call deep value flows, which are really important. We have to start imagining how we can illuminate these deep value flows. Climate beneficial sourcing and verification is one such flow. Localism is another deep value flow. So this is like really important for us to look at as creative people, as problem solvers. Like, how can we start to make these value flows visible? The other thing that we do to reshape things is looking at the growth model itself of our clothing and textile systems. So, right now our clothing and textile systems operate in linear models, which we are all aware of. I think everyone's sitting here, everyone in the audience, this extraction, consumption, and waste model. We have to figure out ways to turn that into systems that are interdependent and regenerative. The other thing is thinking about how to grow things in a truly distributed way. Our economic system tends to consolidate economic resources and grow things in siloed, centralized ways. So how can we start to change things so that we're actually growing things in ways where we're creating interdependencies with each other. And particularly when you look at how we scale, like we have these efficiencies of scale that we started talking about earlier to keep the price point low, but how do we build efficiencies of interdependence where we're all working together collectively? So our Carbon Farm Network is doing that work. So our Carbon Farm Network is an interdependent group of designers who want to be sourcing climate beneficial.
One second. I'm just stealing the chair. Go ahead, sorry.
We're on now. Sourcing climate beneficial fibers and farmers who want to be implementing climate beneficial practices on their farm. We're growing this in such a way where we're developing a purchasing cooperative this year. We're really trying to incorporate it. So the group of designers that I'm working with, and Leah is on the panel today. She's one of the designers I've been working with for a few years now. We're purchasing the fiber and making yarn together collectively. And what that really does is it does a couple of things. It creates democratic governance, this idea of self-sufficiency, and collaborative value creation, which is really, really important. So I guess the two takeaways of what I'm saying today is let's talk about deep value creation and collaborative value creation. I think those are two really super, super important things that we have to look at as creative people moving forward to really tackle what's happening with climate change in the environment, and so that we're not just putting stuff out there, With that being said, system level changes are obviously important, and there's work being done to create systematic changes in fashion and textile industry at large. So people on the panel here are going to be talking about that. There's legislation on the table to create a standard for the fashion industry's environmental and social practices. There's focused attention on greenwashing that's been happening with third-party certifiers, which is really disturbing. And there are designers who are taking initiative to source better and shape the industry the way we want it to be. Okay. So I'm going to take a minute and just introduce our panelists. Maybe you can just raise your, because you're not in order. And I'm going to do my best to get everybody. Last year I forgot someone, which was terrible. So Carolyn Priebe is a designer, strategist, and founder of the Center for the Advancement of Garment Making. She's spent the last 20 years working with pioneering apparel brands, using systems thinking to design sustainable apparel, supply chains, and business models. For the last 7 years, she has advised apparel and footwear startups, SMEs, multinational corporations, as well as manufacturers on how to design and implement sustainable circular strategies and take advantage of opportunities for net positive impact. Thank you for being here, Carolyn. Liz Alessi from Coach. She's the Advanced Sustainability Initiatives Consultant. She began her career at Victoria's Secret in raw material design and has worked for Marc Jacobs in accessories, raw materials development, in addition to tapestry brands. Her tenure at Coach spanned 16 years, during which she was responsible for leather, fabric, hardware, color and print development for handbags and small leather goods. In her current role, reporting to the creative director, Stuart Vivers, she studies innovative materials, applications, and alternative supply chain models with a focus on circularity and sustainability across all product categories. Thank you for joining us. Oops, sorry. Leah D'Ambrosio. Leah grew up about a half an hour from this farm, Little Creek, in a small town which instilled a lifelong appreciation for the land, farms, and local agriculture. With a background in fashion, buying, and retail management, and an MS in textile design, she founded Woolhide in 2015 through a desire to create a brand whose priorities were more about people and the planet than the bottom line. Thank you for the work that you do, Leah. Becca Coughlan, did I say that right? from Remake. Such an important organization. Thank you for being here. As the Senior Accountability Manager at Remake, Becca heads up the organization's brand accountability reporting and annual fashion accountability report, work which leads the industry to measure what matters and creates a roadmap for big and small companies to improve wages and meet global climate goals. She's currently also pursuing her master's degree in sustainability management at Columbia University. Remake is a global advocacy organization fighting for fair pay and climate justice in the clothing industry. They lead collective action to disrupt the $3 trillion clothing industry and build a global network of citizens, press, legislators, and labor leaders to connect the industry's biggest problems with effective solutions, which is a huge job. Thank you for being here. I think, Carrie, you're the... Right, okay, so Carrie Werner, who I don't have her bio, but Carrie is here to talk about a very important piece of legislation in New York State. And Carrie is an New York State Assembly member. Thank you so much for coming today. I know how busy you are. You have a lot going on, so thank you for joining us. And you can do more of an intro when we get... Okay. Okay, so I'm going to launch into some questions for all of us. Okay, we love to have you ask questions at the end, but we're going to do a couple of questions right now with the panel. I'm going to start with Carolyn and Becca, because I think this is a good place to start. The Fashion Act is a bill. Okay, so we're going to talk about legislation right now. The Fashion Act is a bill that's been sponsored by State Senator Alessandra Biaggi and Assembly Member Keels. It creates a standard for the fashion industry's environmental and social practices. It intends to end fashion's destructive impacts on the environment and worldwide exploitation of garment factory workers. The act is targeting to regulate any company with over 100 million in global revenue. The thrust of this bill, it creates transparency, demands benchmarks for mandatory disclosures and due diligence, accountability, that's what we're talking about, and enforcement through the Attorney General's office, which can fine a company up to 2% of their global revenue as a penalty, which on 100 million, I don't know, that's a question. But I'd like you both to talk about the mission of your organizations and the work that you've done to amend the Fashion Act. Okay, and maybe you can also point out any differences and similarities in the Fashion Act legislation to the Fabric Act introduced by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and the House of Representatives by Carolyn Maloney. I mean, I don't know if it might be good to frame that, because I think people get confused about those two things. Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys share the mic. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. If you can start. I don't know who wanted to start. Carolyn will start. Thank you.
Oh, me. Okay. It seemed like you were ready to start.
Oh, all right. Gets my blood going. Okay, so the mission of the Center for the Advancement of Garment Making is to use my design skills to design business strategy and business models, really rooted in sustainability, beauty, and justice. And so that's how, we go about our work. And that shows up in various forms. It's a very bespoke process. And then pro bono, not for pay. I read through the New York State Fashion Act with a friend, Veronica Bates-Cassatley, who's an independent data analyst. And we had some concerns, or a lot of concerns, especially about the data disclosures that would be required in the New York State Fashion Act. And the language of the bill is a bit complicated, but the gist is that the environmental disclosures would it's promulgated by the WRI. Well, they have a roadmap, and that roadmap defers to numbers using this tool called the Hague MSI, which I'm sure most of you are aware of.
Carolyn, maybe can you just frame what Hague is?
Yeah.
It might be useful.
Yeah. So the Hague is, I don't quite understand the relationship, but the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is a not-for-profit that a lot of large brands join as members. Then there's this for-profit business called the Hague and I think it's that the I don't exactly know because one's for profit and one's not for profit. But anyways, they work together. And the SAC promotes the HIG. The HIG owns and has created a lot of different tools. And one of the tools is called the MSI, and it is a materials sustainability index, except there's no social part of it. It's all environmental measurements. And it's been in the news quite a bit. I don't know how deep to get into it, but it's problematic. We'll get into it later. Yeah. So it's problematic and inaccurate at best. And it also has, using their proprietary algorithm, which isn't open for peer review, decided that polyester gets the best score. So if brands, this would then embed that tool into the legislation, and the disclosures would be based on this tool that says polyester is the most sustainable textile, and then presumably everyone would be like, oh, we have to use textile because we have to use polyester because the law says so now, and this is how we get the best scores. This is how we decarbonize our supply chain. So what I organized a group of activists, natural fiber producers, eco-age, whatnot, and we people that are sort of very close to the sources of fiber. And we wrote up data, we wrote up new language for the bill. And I can say most of it has been adopted. And this most of the recommendations were just simply to disqualify HIG data. They have not taken the WRI out of the language yet, but the language of the bill should supersede the WRI's roadmap, but we don't have that assurance quite yet. So anyways, we're still working on it. And then the Fabric Act is much more labor oriented. So there was SB 62 in California was passed so that there would be a wage floor that is the minimum wage, and instead of piece rates, which sometimes ends up meaning that workers don't make a minimum wage. And then, they could get piece rates on top of that, but there's a floor. So it's expanding upon the work in California, and then also there's various incentives for domestic manufacturing to bolster that is the gist. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So in a nutshell, Remake's mission is to get garment workers in the fashion industry paid a fair living wage. And we believe that will not only obviously impact the lives of garment workers themselves, but it will have a positive knock-on effect in terms of climate. What we call our theory of change is that paying a living wage is like a key step in slowing down production, consumption, and waste generation in the fashion industry. And that is why a large portion of our work is trying to pass legislation in this country that centers garment workers' rights, raises wages and working conditions, such as SB 62 in California and the Fabric Act at the federal level. And then in terms of the Fashion Act, my colleagues have worked, with Caroline and others to try and attempt to ensure that any legislation that gets passed holds brands accountable for addressing the issues and harms caused by the supply chains, rather than simply just disclosing the issues and harms caused in their supply chains, and that fashion companies are jointly liable at a legal level. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. I think, Carrie, maybe you can talk about the Textile Act in your state, the legislation that's being proposed as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Assemblywoman Carrie Warner. I represent portions of Saratoga and Washington counties, which is north of here. Some of you may know Saratoga County is the oldest thoroughbred racetrack in North America, but we also have a lot of farms, and we have a lot of fiber farms. We have sheep, Romneys mostly, and alpaca. We have some goats. We have some rabbits. And we have a fiber mill that converts the fleece all the way to the skein. We've also seen a growing collection of production weavers and designers who find the lifestyle in Saratoga and Washington County to be really to their liking. So over the course of a number of years, I've been watching as the fiber industry in my counties started to grow. And as I learned more about the industry, many of the topics that we talked about today about how climate beneficial grazing animals is, how I don't know if you talked about hemp earlier, but hemp is a crop that is a carbon sink. So it takes more carbon out of the atmosphere than it produces. So it is a great product, and we have a lot of hemp farmers where I come from. Some of them are converting to be marijuana farmers, but others will remain in hemp. The CBD market goes up and down, but hemp fiber is a great opportunity space for all of those people who've now learned to grow hemp. So in thinking about all of that, what I realized was that our supply chain in New York, and I'm all about made in New York, and which is why I love the Textile Lab, because your motto is to find producers within a 300-mile radius of New York City, but what we don't have in New York is the entire supply chain. So you might have noticed some of the really wonderful alpaca socks upstairs, sourced in New York, made in Pennsylvania, because we don't have a sock manufacturer in Pennsylvania, in New York. So my thought was that one of the things we needed to do was to try to build out the supply chain and to provide incentives for companies to locate here. Because if we can build up that supply chain, that's going to encourage more farmers. Somebody asked about, can you actually make a living doing this? And the answer is you can if you can do it at scale, but you're only going to be able to get to scale if you have somebody that's going to process it into a product that one of the designers sitting up here is going to buy or out there is going to buy. And so where the Fashion Act puts on regulations on the industry to ensure climate beneficial practices, I wanted to take a different approach and say, let's provide incentives for those who are doing sustainably produced textiles based in plant or animal fiber. Let's provide some incentives. So let's incorporate them in our economic development law. Let's help them to be in part of the state contract. So the state buys an awful lot of textiles. So all the DEC officers that are in the Adirondacks patrolling, they all have jackets that are sourced by New York State. It'd be great if they were made with New York State products. So getting it into the state finance law, if you are producing products that use sustainably produced plant or animal fiber grown in New York, and then creating in ag and markets an award. I come from big dairy land, and there's blue ribbon milk and blue ribbon yogurt. Well, we should have blue ribbon textiles, because we want the world to know that good quality textiles are made in New York, that we produce great fiber, and that results in great textiles. So I wanted to create a set of incentives that would raise up the profile of New York's textile industry, create a reason to have a broader supply chain, which would increase the number of farms that are doing it. And one of the other things, and I'll just close with this, is that we see a lot of farmland being converted to energy production with solar panels. And when we lose farmland that produced food at one point, or other ag products in the service of production of renewable energy, it puts two things that we really value at odds with one another. But the good news is that with agrivoltaics, it's actually very beneficial to have sheep grazing on fields with solar panels. So by uplifting the textile industry, by trying to encourage more people to be in the production of fiber, and doing that by having a supply chain that works, we can achieve both our renewable energy goals as well as leave that land in some ag production. So the Textile Act, it passed both houses, both the Assembly and the Senate. It is sitting on the governor's desk to be signed. I was hoping I would be able to tell you it was signed today, but I couldn't. But it will soon be signed, and it will be, I think, I'm really excited to see how that step helps us grow made in New York with the fibers.
What's it called, sorry, again, the bill?
The Textile Act.
The Textile Act.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So these, pieces of legislation are really important to help us start to shift behavior, I think like having people from the industry like behind it is just like so critical, again. Okay, I'm gonna just shift to Liz from Coach, and I want to talk about the leather markets. So the markets for leather goods are changing to address consumer demands, as well as comply with new regulations that aim to prevent greenwashing. The Leather Working Group just announced a chain of custody project to create transparency. I mean, this is something that's happening in the industry. Can you talk to the group about how the work you're doing at Coach addresses these concerns and supports practice-based verifications that connect designers directly to their leather sources, both the land and the animals?
Thank you. I'm so proud to be on this panel. Holy Hannah, I don't know what I'm doing here. The work that Coach has done thus far has been quite good. We have a partnership with the Savory Institute. We are trying to source hides and are currently sourcing hides through Other Half Processing, which is another incredible organization within the Regenerative Farming Network. And I think you guys asked some really wonderful questions as we were walking around the farm today. And one was about quantity. So here we are as a multi-billion-dollar leather goods brand. And we were told by the Savory Institute we could only have a certain amount of hides to work with, which was perfectly fine. Then we have to work within that. Another great point that I think Stacie made earlier was to maintain a continuous demand for this. So that was another big step that we made. We made an evergreen program to support regenerative leather making. However, I will say that working in a big brand, and some of my very, very talented colleagues are here on the creative side, it's a little bit of a rough go when you're trying to change supply chain inside of a large organization. I'm very passionate about domestic manufacturing, and I'm very passionate about New York State supply chain as well. I think we're gonna be friends. But I have to say, when I was here at the farm tour, when was that? Through June. I ran over and visited a tannery that's not too far away to try to connect the dots between my local butcher in Brooklyn to the farm, to the abattoir, to the tannery that only does the wet end, not the dry end. Then connecting with another tannery that had to do the finishing, and then to try to find a manufacturer. So, and I do that outside of, that's pro bono as well, in fact. But if I can get Coach to pick up something like that, I think it would be really meaningful. And I understand too that Governor Hochul has committed $10 million to connecting upstate farming to downstate fashion, which I think is unbelievable.
I know, very exciting.
And she went to the Coach runway show.
Exciting.
I know. I was excited too.
Did you have a Coach bag?
I don't know. I actually asked Stuart about it in our meeting, and I was like, "Did you give her a ticket?" He's like, "No, she requested a ticket." And then I was like, "Well, she made this announcement. Like, weren't we aware?" And he's like, "No." But I guess my point is that every little bit counts. So every single person who is sitting up on this panel, every single one of you guys out here, you're going to do your part to make a difference. And it's never too small. It's literally never too small. I got connected with Stacie and with Rebecca Burgess through the other half processing folks when I was interested in leather. And then we started talking about regenerative wool and climate beneficial wool. And Rebecca said, hey, why don't you guys start working with Faribault Mills? It's one of the last woolen mills in the U.S. And that was, I don't know, 6 months ago now, Stacie. We don't have a throw yet. We will have a throw, but it's going to happen. We're going to have 500 throws that are made with climate beneficial wool, made in the USA, with some kind of Coach artwork on it. Hopefully soon. I'll keep you guys all posted. But it takes a long, long time. So hats off to all of you guys for everything that you're doing. And I'm sure if you're in a smaller company, you're able to move a little bit faster than I am. But just know that you have comrades inside I call it the sausage machine, as the supply chain of big brands should always be called, the sausage machine. But it's just, there's a lot of work to do, and it's all hands on deck, and there should be no competitive atmosphere at all. So just working towards that.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I mean, this idea of really working collectively, and I love your comment that no effort is too small is really important, and that brings me to a smaller brand. Someone who's very near and dear to me, who's in our network, Leah, is an independent designer and a brand that operates with a high level of environmental ethics. Can you talk about the meaning and use of certifications? What is the most important to you? And, as we pointed out earlier, there's been so much, focus on the greenwashing that's happening with third-party certifiers. So I'm going to pass this over to you.
Thank you. Well, I think, as we were talking about, certifications are tricky. And we've learned recently that some certifications are not serving their purpose. They're serving, a marketing purpose for certain brands. But then there are also certifications that are doing really good work, like Climate Beneficial, who I think, they're working to build communities and to educate people and to really work with the farms and get them on board with a certain plan. And so there's just so much nuance within certifications that, they're kind of meant to be this black and white thing where you say this is certified, okay, that's good. But there's so much behind it that we don't know about or is not talked about, or in good and bad ways. So for me, I think that certifications have never really been an important factor for me. Also, being a small business and wanting to work with other small businesses, it's often cost prohibitive for small manufacturers or suppliers. So it's never been something that I've been super interested in, is I don't care about certifications that much. But I think that the more important work is building relationships with people and really trying to understand what they are actually doing. And, you could have a farmer that goes above and beyond organic, but they're not certified organic because they don't want to pay for it, or they don't know enough about it, or they don't think it's worth it. So, I think that certifications also take us away from that human aspect of really knowing where our stuff comes from. And so that, to me, that's the more important part, is just having conversations with people and really trying to talk to everybody that you can along the supply chain and understand what they do, understand how they operate, how they pay people, just, really trying to build relationships and talk with people is more important to me. Yeah.
Can I add one quick thing on the certifications? I think Gibson made an incredible point earlier, and I just want to drive it home that one of the issues is for all good intent with the certifications, they're meant to be used as a broad stroke across, let's say, the world or even the United States. And as Gibson pointed out, like Stacie's work is going to be different than the work that's done here. It's going to be work that's done there. It's not a bad thing that they're trying to do it, but it's too broad. And to your point, it does need to be based on your individual relationships and understanding what's happening in your area to make an impact where you are. And so even with wool, there's ZQ, and then there's regenerative certified, and then there's climate beneficial. And it can be really confusing to understand which stamp you're supposed to get if you can even afford it, to your point.
Thank you. And that's why, I stand behind, as a designer, these practice-based, place-based certifications where you actually, know the farm, and see the land and have a relationship with that. And I really loved Leah's comment as well about how important these relationships are, these connections and relationships. It's really key in the industry as we move forward to work together, again, to tackle these problems. So Becca, I have another question for you. Remake's theory of change is that by paying garment workers a living wage, both the social harm and the environmental damages caused by the fashion industry are reduced. Higher wages would change the business model in fashion, leading companies to slow down and make less. Can you talk a little about Remake's fashion accountability report and let us know the impact it's having to persuade fashion brands to shift practices? I wonder the impact, and just frame the report so people understand it. Thank you.
Yeah, so the Remake Fashion Accountability Report is an annual report that we release sort of just before the Black Friday season every year. And it's based on assessments that we conduct of large and small fashion brands according to our accountability criteria, as well as, developments that maybe have happened in the fashion industry that year. It's not dissimilar to the Fashion Revolution Transparency Index or the Business of Fashion Sustainability Index, but where I would say we perhaps differ slightly is that we only award points to companies that can demonstrate progress towards meeting their social and environmental goals rather than simply just having those goals in the first place. So, it's amazing that we're seeing so many brands adopt science-based targets that are in line with the 1.5 degree pathway, but we want to see that you are on track to meet these. And in terms of impact, I think it's perhaps a little too soon to say. We recently overhauled the criteria by which we assess brands. That was done last year. But what I'm really encouraged by is that, as you said, it takes a long time for these big companies to overhaul their supply chains. And so there definitely is a lag between the concepts that we are socializing now and the actions of companies. But we're really encouraged by the conversations that we are increasingly having with brands beyond like the nitty-gritties of their scores, but, about these systemic issues. Such as, degrowth, paying a living wage, like true product life cycle stewardship. So that's, really encouraging. And what's also really cool is Remake has a massive community of like change makers around the world who are also, working within these brands, and they're increasingly approaching us to find out how they can take our criteria or take what they've learned from our accountability report and try and make the changes within the companies that they're working for. So that's been very, very cool to see. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I was looking at it, and it's pretty rigorous. Like there's, it's hard to get a high score. Because I was looking at brands that I think are incredibly sustainable and, like looking at their points and, it's interesting. I like that the standards are so high on it, and that it's addressing all of these issues like the degrowth issue that you mentioned, which leads us to another question that I kind of wanted to open up to everybody on the panel, and it has to do with this idea of degrowth. Carrie, you weren't prepped with this particular question. Everyone else on the panel got a little chance to think about it, but you'll be all right. So degrowth is being considered as a strategy to address the excessive extraction, overconsumption, and extreme waste that is inherent to the growth logic of capitalism. The concept behind the degrowth movement is to move into what we call an eco-social economy that focuses on equity, sufficiency, and human well-being rather than the growth as the main objective. So in what ways is your company or organization addressing degrowth? That's the question. And this is, if anyone got a chance to look at that QR code, it takes you to my website, and there's a really great podcast with Rebecca Burgess and Jason Hickel that everyone should listen to that points to this degrowth, concept. Who wants to go first? Yeah. Thank you.
It's one of my favorite topics. I was like, pick me. Because I think that there is, I love trash. I love waste. I think it's like, it's the most fun thing that I work on in my job. And Coach has done a couple of good things in going in the right direction. So you probably are aware of the Coach Reloved program, where older bags that are not able to be repaired by the repair workshop are sort of redesigned by a design team, and they become unique and beautiful and are sold as one-of-a-kind pieces. And I think that that's being scaled as much as it possibly can, but it doesn't solve the French fry problem, as my good friend Steve from BVH likes to say, meaning it's hard to do at scale and it's expensive. And so there are a lot of ways. First of all, I think the first thing that you want to do is like waste map where your waste is in your own company. So for example, at Coach, there is waste. Let's say I'm going to talk about leather because I know that best. There is a cutting room. There's waste at the tannery. There's waste in the factory from the cutting room floor. And then there's the finished goods that may not get sold. And then there's the take back program. So now it's post-consumer coming back to you. How do you disassemble and to find ways of recycling or reusing those materials that you have? And so I think in the way the big brand can address degrowth is by not using new materials. I think that's a huge one, because in everyone's impact report as a fashion brand, the materials are always the biggest impact on CO2. And so reducing, not only just using preferred materials like the best of class, to your point, but also trying to look at what you have and think about using it in a different way. Can you piece together little bits of leather? Leather is a very valuable substance. It's literally the hide of an animal. It should be revered and used as long as it possibly can. And it's a long-standing tradition to take the end of life of an animal and use it for something. And so for us, that's one of the biggest things that we're looking at, is trying to use what we have and take it apart and then even recycle it and grind up the leather bits into something new, into a new substrate that can then have another life. So landfill diversion is a big one too.
So I work with different size clients, and my smaller clients are just working towards steady state business models. So where they grow to a certain level, and then they like their life and everyone's being paid and the supply chain's great, and then they just, sort of try to maintain that. So they don't really need, degrowth really doesn't apply to them. My larger clients who are publicly traded company, who have a fiduciary duty to shareholders to grow every year, are interested in it, but not interested in applying it yet. They're just more interested in me creating reports and explaining how they could, creating a degrowth strategy. Like, what would that look like in practice? And that they're not quite ready to implement yet. They're really interested in, repair and reuse, but not having that say, or resale, but it doesn't offset any new production or any new growth, which is, continuing to grow exponentially, whether the world needs it or not. Fashion isn't produced for need. It's in public companies, it's produced for wealth creation for shareholders. And it's so really aligning our resources with needs. And then the other part that's really actually a sort of degrowth scholar whose book has really changed some of my strategy is, which Elizabeth Klein from Remake has written about quite a bit now, is Roland Geyer wrote this book, The Business of Less. And one of the strategies that he debunks is like the ability to have a win-win strategy, like grow your business and decarbonize. And he explains why it doesn't work, but what does work is in not divesting in labor, but investing in labor, because labor has, like, if you put your money into labor and instead of materials, it has no environmental impact, and it is all positive social impact, which is another argument for why, increasing the minimum wage or whatnot is actually an environmental strategy to reduce your impact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
You were going to take a privately held business and who has a product concept and your model for sustainable level of production, let's say, not growth. So how do you blend the mechanization that integrates the reduction of labor costs in a way? Not that you want to do that in the model generally, but that's really what gives you a lot of advantage today that we're missing a lot, frankly, in the United States currently on the technical aspect of producing a product.
Yeah.
So a loom is to get a loom and the weaving setup, and you could spend $250,000 just to get a small outfit going. So you could lease that, and what kind of, have you sort of developed a model of what's the annual sales going to be for a product line that you can mark up and have a price point? Have you kind of?
Yeah, it's really bespoke to the business model, and then the public again, if it's a publicly traded company, it's harder because the business model it won't accept that. Yeah. Which is a problem bigger than fashion,
Fair enough, but it's the privately held, perhaps, that could initially be, what I'm talking about at the end. Kind of
yeah, the growth and profit. So for the privately held companies, they need to grow to a point where they're profitable so that they're financially sustainable. Yeah, and that it's really like their impact is kind of a blip on the radar. It's really and depending on how you design your business model, if you use climate beneficial materials, you can be net positive, socially and environmentally. And it's really just all how you design it. It's really in my opinion, a publicly and VC backed company problem.
fair enough.
Yeah.
So I'm more like your small brands that just kind of, want to get to like a maintain, support a few people type of thing. I never built the brand with the idea of, getting it huge and wanting to take on big investment or anything. And I come from a family of, small businesses and grew up in a small town with lots of mom and pop shops. So I just see a lot of value in small businesses. And I think that, they, most of the time, they're inherently more ethical because there's like less distance between decision making and an employee or a customer or a manufacturer or somebody along the supply chain. So I think, our society's gotten really obsessed with like huge growth and taking on huge investment and trying to become this sort of, unicorn company that just like skyrockets to the top. And I think we really need to just kind of refocus and like support and understand small businesses more and really just see the value in them more.
I'm not sure what I can add to this conversation other than just say that I think the consumer trend is going to reward companies that reduce their waste stream by reusing products or taking products back and remaking them into something else. And at the state level, we have an extended producer responsibility bill that isn't just oriented towards the fashion industry, but it's really aimed at all companies and asking or requiring that they take back their products and be responsible for doing something with it so it's not in the landfill. And I think that that's just an indicative of sort of our society's general shift to wanting to reduce the waste stream and keep our land for something productive and not just to hold unwanted, unloved products anymore.
So as I mentioned, last year we overhauled the metrics by which we assess brands, and we kind of were seeing, as I said, all of these big fashion companies starting to set science-based targets to reduce their emissions. But we kind of laughed internally because we were like, you're pursuing unlimited product output growth and you have these targets to reduce your emissions, and that is just not compatible. So we decided to really weave this idea of degrowth into our entire criteria, from paying a living wage to this idea of full product life cycle stewardship. And as Caroline said, brands are also starting to have circularity initiatives like rental, repair, resale. But we specifically ask brands, are you using these initiatives to displace like virgin product output? Because otherwise it's just adding to the pile. And I will say that it's really funny because when we were going through the process of creating this criteria sheet, we were speaking to a lot of industry experts and degrowth experts, and even they were sort of saying to us, we would be very wary of you using the actual word degrowth in your criteria sheet. People are so afraid of this. And only a year later, it's already, so much more socialized, which makes our life easier. But yeah, it's amazing to see.
Wow, thank you all for your really thoughtful responses. I just want to point out that there's with our readings, we collected readings and podcasts for everybody who is attending this panel, and there's a really good article on there from the Harvard Business Review about this very issue about how to grow businesses, and they did a study in Detroit, and they studied what had the biggest impact, like a company that was set out to grow fast and very expansively, or a company that had a slow growth kind of initiative, and and they recognized that the company that had the slow growth initiative actually had a bigger impact, whereas like the fast growing company, the initial job creation impact was big, but then quickly, because of the need to grow, it had to leave the community where it started. So actually the slow growth model has a bigger impact on community. So it's really interesting. Evan.
Continuation of this question is when we talk about growth, we're all answering the question in framing it in our individual corporations and our institutions. How do we shift the paradigm to think about the economy itself as its own superorganism, and how do economies themselves grow or don't grow? And how can economies not grow big, giant multinational companies, but grow horizontally and laterally and have lots of small companies rather than a handful of big organizations.
Right.
How do we shift that thinking? It's very fundamental, and I'm challenged with that notion. Thinking about economy as itself an organism.
Right, and to grow things the way natural systems grow, which, is fractally, right? It's a different logic. And our human systems are so incredibly disconnected from that at this point. So, how do we get back to, as human beings, like having a similar growth model, and how do we do that with our current economic system, that measures other things, right? It rewards a different type of growth and competition. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Let's open up to the audience. Yeah. No, absolutely not.
$700 million in tax.
Yeah, I mean, there's if you start digging in and looking at the tax savings, there's also a tax savings there, sorry? I just don't think it changes anything in terms of, the social order that's in place around the way wealth centralizes, and I don't think it's making a difference. But here, let's hear.
Yeah, and they're a fossil fuel based brand, and so it's like buying a broom, like having a bigger broom for the mess you're making already, I don't know. I don't know if that was the intent. I mean, I don't know if we'll know the intent. I just don't think it's going to change anything either.
The one thing that I just want to add about greenwashing, the word in general, is that it's really easy to get angry. I get angry sometimes too about greenwashing. What the hell? What are you thinking? But I think so much of this is new to all of us. I'm learning things all the time. My paradigm of knowledge is shifting constantly. The more I learn, the more interesting people I talk to. I think we can give each other a little bit more grace sometimes when it comes to greenwashing, because sometimes we take so much time to come up with a 100% solution when this is a journey that we're all on. So I might get 2 things right out of 10, but then maybe next year I'll get 3, and maybe next year I'll get 4. So I actually applaud companies and people that are just at least taking a step that they think is the right one, and then learning as you go, because it's really, for me, my journey is really iterative, and I try not to be too pessimistic about it. Even though I know probably I'm just being an idiot. You'll tell me that, probably. Do you want it?
I think there's a level of sacrifice that we all, and I know people don't like to think in terms of sacrificing, but if we're really going to properly address growthism, is what it's called, that's what we're referring to right now, and the impact it has on people and the environment, particularly people in the southern part of the hemisphere that are really suffering the most. We're really going to have to, address this, the way we're setting things up, with the social order of, and how we're dealing with money, I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Kind of building on this topic, I'm interested to know from any of the panelists, sort of, how are you guys creating this community of practice where you have a group or a critical mass of people who are following the same values and following the same ideals of sustainability, and creating a larger business movement, as opposed to individual, as you mentioned, everything is very siloed and there is this centralized moment, but it sounds like you are all working together and have a lot of overlapping ways to like help each other and looking at different aspects of the value chain. So like, is there also like a larger movement to like create this sort of, like community of practice for more sustainable production and consumption?
For me, it's about really collaborative value creation. It's about working with other people, and really creating distributed models, economic models, so that everybody is sort of benefiting, really, right? So that things, and I think it's like a new way of organizing. Our businesses. I think that's part of it, like organizing things more cooperatively. But like I said earlier, I think this idea of sacrifice is, like the Patagonia issue. There's no real sacrifice. It's like there's not. Don't think for a minute that there's big sacrifice there, because there isn't. There's just not. So and it's hard, thinking collectively is a big leap for us. I think our economic system underpins a different type of thinking, right?
Just want to add one thing. I don't want to be that one who talks too much, but I think the big difference, again, to your point about the public company versus private companies, the public companies are hyper competitive, and it's all about, spreadsheets showing how many customers you're getting from, this guy, and how many customers you're getting from that guy. And that's the entire reason for its being, it's about like making the shareholders happy, bringing in more customers. If you've ever sat in an earnings call, you'll know what I'm talking about. And so I think breaking down those barriers and just being really open and honest about the fact that some of these technologies that are going to help Coach, for example, are going to help other brands as well. So I'll give you an example. There was this material that I was working on that I thought would just be absolutely amazing if like every leather goods accessories brand started doing, and if we all created a collective, we could all like really, really impact things. So I called up all my buds, because everyone knows it's like the smallest world ever, right? So I'm like, hey, Kohan, like, hey, you over here, like, yeah. And I was like, I'm just going to send you a swatch of this. And I thought, for a second, I'm in the mailroom at Coach, and I was like, this is weird, right? And then I was like, actually, no, that isn't weird. This is exactly what we have to do. And so I personally might get fired for this, but I'm just going to share as much as possible. And it doesn't matter what level you're at. Just be like, this is a cool technology. This is what I figured out. What have you figured out? Oh, that's really cool too. Like, let's start working together on this. And, again, I'll probably get fired. But I've heard a lot of people say legislation is the answer. No pressure.
She's like, screw that.
Question.
Haven't I done enough?
Okay, 1 minute. Go ahead.
I actually have a legislation question. So for the Textile Act, Carrie, you said that it was providing incentives for people that are farmers that are using more sustainable practices. Well, what about the farmers that are are in the process of doing more sustainable practices? Because it does take a few years to, fix things. And I know that it is hard. People don't want to, they don't get the incentives because they're not fully sustainable, but it costs a lot in order to do it. So people don't want to do it. So is the Textile Act addressing that?
The Textile Act isn't, but we are working, we did a carbon farming pilot a couple of years ago to provide funding for a few farms to develop carbon farming best practices that could then be adopted more widely. And in that realm, there are programs through Ag and Markets to help farms get started with a carbon smart farming practices.
I'm going to be that person. Sorry, one more thing. Just to add that actually a lot of the third-party verifiers are helping to support transitional time. So it's usually like a 3-year period between when you start down a regenerative process to when you can actually call yourself regenerative. and that period is called transitional. So if the third-party verifier says, you know, I can say that all of this is regenerative and transitional regenerative, it's helping to bridge that gap. To your point on that and your previous point about how brands are really competitive, that's actually one of the tools I use. I'm like, oh, well, Walmart's making this investment in these like recycling facilities, excuse me, and they're partnering with the municipalities, and it's going pretty well. So you've only, you know, invested $1 million here, like. So I do, yeah. So I do a lot of benchmarking, but to incentivize investment in invested areas. And then the other thing, to Evan's point, I think, and your question, is, so I think relationships is really key, and then storytelling is really key, as we all know, for change in everywhere. And I learned recently that part of the reason why competition is such like a big part of our capitalist society is because it was influenced by Darwin's survival of the fittest. But what I learned was that Carl Sagan's ex-wife actually got a master's at the University of Wisconsin, go Wisconsin, and she debunked that evolution was caused by survival of this like competition. And really what she discovered was that bacteria actually collaborate and cooperate, and like that's how they survive. And so we've come to exist via cooperation and collaboration, but that story hasn't been told because she's a woman and we don't like to tell those stories, but it really like negated a lot of what Darwin had to say. So we need news stories. So I'm telling everyone about that story.
And actually, competition is really underpinned by our interest-based debt system of capitalism. You know what I mean? That's what really, but that's so interesting. I love that story. Evan.
Liz, I commend you on sharing with your competitors. I think that's incredible, even if it might have put your career at risk.
It's already a risk.
Okay. and on the end, Liz? No. Leah. And also staying small and collaborating as well. But you leaned towards legislation as a possible means to deal with competition. Who is exploring innovation as a means to deal with competition? And specifically, I'm talking to distributed technologies, right? Now we're 12 years, 18 years into the blockchain world, into distributed technologies now that are going to facilitate collaboration. Is anybody exploring that? Yes. That was
We are. You set me up. We are. New York Textile Lab is. We did not plan that. I'm sorry. We did not. Questions? Yes.
So obviously everyone here is super passionate about this industry, but I'm curious what ways you could use to educate people that maybe know nothing about it to push them to the point of wanting to vote at all or purchase the product in the first place, like make it matter to them, even if they don't feel like it's important.
Wow, that's good. Comments. Who has comments on that? The consumer. I mean, the end user. I mean, we've been talking a lot about that, how important that is, you know, to help people shift, you know, their purchasing behavior and the way they relate to their all products, not just clothing even. I mean, clothing happens to be horribly wasteful, you know, but yeah, I think that's really important. You know, I mean, I'm a teacher, so I have that ability to reach people that way, but yeah.
I agree with that, and I think that's important, but I think that larger public companies rely on the excuse that, oh, consumers aren't ready, like they're not buying it, and they need to do the right thing first, regardless. I find it to be an excuse used too often as to not take action. It's not the consumer's responsibility for Target. I'm just using them as an example to like do the right thing, you know.
I just want to add on to your comment before too. I think storytelling is a big part of it, and just having brands that are doing some work. I think that some people, like some brands, will not talk about what they're doing because they feel like it's not enough, or maybe they're not doing the right thing. But I think that just brands being more transparent and open and telling their story of why they're doing what they're doing and what decisions they're making would be really helpful.
Question back there.
My question is legislative related. What do you guys think about, like, as the New York legislators?
You got it.
Do you think about any way to reduce the waste of the textile and fashion industry, as one of like the second contributors to pollution?
That's a good question.
So the answer is we are definitely engaged in a conversation about how do we reduce the waste stream generally. And as I said, the extended producer responsibility bill is really about holding producers responsible for taking back their products and not putting them in the waste stream. And one would hope that there's a dismantling of them, reusing parts and components, building something new out of them so that it is upcycled from there. I think that, one of my goals with the Textile Act was to really reward not producing manufactured textiles, but sustainably produced textiles from natural fibers. Because natural fibers are going to break down. If they do end up in the landfill, they're going to break down. And they're not going to last, into the next millennium. And that's what we want, is to reduce the amount of manufactured textiles, which is, just to be New York centric, North Carolina, really big in manufactured textiles. And we don't want North Carolina in New York. We want sustainably produced textiles. And that was my goal with the Textile Act. That's why I'm so excited about the work that Laura's doing, because I think that's, the more we can push those sustainably produced textiles, and we can get more brands really focused on using those textiles instead of the manufactured textiles. And, Patagonia, I don't know whether they're still doing it, but they were for a while doing a hemp-based fabric as opposed to a manufactured fabric, which is great. It has wonderful characteristics, and it, should it end up in a landfill, it's going to break down. So I think there's definitely movement in that direction. Sure. Absolutely. We're still trying to get more bottles recycled, but yes, we could expand that to fiber. That's a great idea.
I love that. That's great. Like just for textiles, because people always ask me, they're like, what am I doing? What do I do with my textiles? I put textiles into the clothing drop, but and hope that they'll end up, but that's great. Love that. Yes, there was a question.
I want to say about dissemination of information and educating people is that a lot, I think, can be done through the farmers market. Having presence there, augmenting that with information and products from this level of sale and smaller manufacturers. There's so many farmers markets. It's just like right growing a lot. And it's really nice to have them with their Watershed booth, products, and my story of people have been working on that for several years, and it's very successful. You get a chance to one-on-one talk to people and educate, have
That's great. And I sell at farmers markets. That's my primary. That's basically where I sell my products. Yeah, right. And you direct to consumer for one. And then also all of those benefits that you outlined for one, like, to be able to have a conversation with people. And then also to be selling textiles right next to our producers, of food. And that's so important to me. And a lot of people don't realize this, but New York Textile Lab started as a project at the Union Square Green Market in New York City with a mobile kitchen and workstation called Textile Lab that I would wheel that into the green market with students to kind of draw this connection between textiles and clothing and food production. And we'd make natural dyes there. So I have an affinity to that. So I appreciate that comment quite a bit. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Right. Did you guys get that question? Did you want to talk?
Yeah. I can, because we donate to Sam's Scrap.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Liz.
They were on our panel last year.
Okay. Yeah, the bags will say coach on them. I think that I feel you. I'm literally disgusted. I remember the first day when my job for many years was to be in charge of all the sampling of the materials and buying all these materials, and my team would set aside all of these different colors or different things because we weren't sure what the color palette was going to look like or where we were going to produce things, and it was all in service of the sausage machine. And I remember the day that I saw the spreadsheet and the waste factor was 80 to 90% of just untouched. And I won't give you the number because then I'll definitely get fired. But I was disgusted. I went to my boss. I was like, God, this is awful. What are you doing here? And he's like, I don't know. I guess you could try to work on the PDT, the calendar, and maybe we can set it up differently. So internally, it became my mission, set up the calendar differently so we wouldn't have to pre-position all this stuff, right? And I thought I got it there, and that was a year and a half ago, and it's still happening. I am no longer that person who has to make the order, though, thank God. But it's a really, really hard question. And it's acknowledged, and I think the more it's talked about, and I hate to use that shame word again, but it should be embarrassing. It should be embarrassing for everyone that they're participating in this thing. So the best thing we've been doing so far is trying to help recycle and upcycle, just try to keep it out of the landfill and finding innovative ways of doing that. But that was kind of a downer. I'm sorry.
I can add to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, like we keep saying, it takes so much and so much time to make all of these changes. And going back to this thing of, I think companies can start to diversify their revenue streams in a way that reduces the amount that they're producing. So it's not stopping production, but it's, reducing the amount of new stuff that is sold. And I think that is scalable for certain companies, not all. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Great. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah.
those initiatives happening here having an impact in changing the way that we do business overseas and caring about the well-being of garment workers there.
I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can chat a little bit, not to any of the legislation that's been spoken about today, but the Uighur Forced Labor Prevention Act that was recently passed here. That is like stopping goods that, you know, may have been tainted with forced labor at the border. And so now what the big ask is, that's the United States. Companies, you know, then can bifurcate their supply chains so they can, you know, prevent any tainted goods going to the US, but then instead ship them to other countries. So I think then we need like sort of the global collaboration to you know, prevent the bifurcation of supply chains so that there aren't standards for some countries and others. And yeah.
Anyone else? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't.
Did you want to? Sure, yeah.
The SB 62 really and the Fabric Act are really like domestic focused, but it's great to clean up at home first. And then the New York State Fashion Act will affect global brands because so much fashion goes through New York. It will have national and global ramifications. Less so than we'd like on the labor side. It's more disclosure based, as Remakes has been working on that actually, or to fix that. And on the environmental side, to a degree, like they haven't settled on what percentage of tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 suppliers they need to disclose, but they have to do some sort of assessment to show which need the most attention. And then to, you know, take measurements, site-specific measurements there for emissions, water, and chemical management. So that in that way, it will have a global impact because the supply chains are global, and they'll have to map them also, which will be interesting.
I'll just add one thing. Yeah, that traceability is gonna be a big, heavy lift for a lot of big brands because the supply chain is so multinational and so many people involved. If you guys haven't seen the film True Cost, watch it. I know most people probably have. That's my dream would one day be to look at a cost sheet and see, you know, fabric, leather, hardware, social impact, CO2 impact, duty, freight, packaging. So if somebody wants to take that home as their project, feel free to do that.
Okay, it's getting late, and I just want to say that I think we're gonna have to end just because a lot of people need to get back to the train. But I so appreciate everyone who's on this panel and the work that you do. Thank you so much. I mean, it was just, the conversation was really terrific today. Thank you for being here. Thank you, audience, for being here too. Thank you for caring about these issues, you know, and for attending on this beautiful day. Thanks.